Welcome to the show today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have another really incredible guest on Unaborted today. Her name is Jennifer Lahl. You may have heard of some of her work. We have actually referenced her in this show before, and she is on the front lines against every new breaking edge assault against the family, against children, against the voiceless, against the vulnerable, contending for the rights of children both inside and outside the womb, with people like our friend Katie Faust, who I've told you before is cost me donors on this show because I offended the political and maybe selfish sensibilities of pro-lifers who haven't fully applied their ethic to every life and family issue. But Jennifer's been blowing the trumpet actually on many of these issues for much longer than they've been on the front lines. She is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture and has dedicated herself to raising awareness about the ethical problems of big fertility, the surrogacy industry, and what I call the transgender cult. A former pediatric critical care nurse, Jennifer brings a unique bioethical perspective to these cultural battlefronts, which always seem, have you noticed, always seem to harm children the most. Her documentaries and films have won awards and focused on all of these issues. Her film Exploitation actually was awarded Best Documentary by the California Independent Film Festival and sold in more than 30 countries. Her film Anonymous Father's Day, a documentary film exposing the stories of women and men who were created by anonymous sperm donation. And then in 2014, she completed what is now a trilogy of films on the ethics of third-party reproduction with Breeders, a subclass of women, which focuses on surrogacy. And then in July 2015, a documentary short, Maggie's Story, which follows one woman's egg donation, quote-unquote, journey. And her most recent film is called The Detransition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters, which was released in the fall. And I didn't even name them all. A warrior and voice for the voiceless and vulnerable. Jennifer is a target of the theocracy of secular humanism, the only state religion in our country today, because she's coming against their core sacraments. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. Jennifer, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Seth. I'm really happy to chat with you and get to know you.
Yes, I've been hearing your name for a while, largely from Katie Faust. And then, of course, Allie Stuckey. Really enjoyed having you and Katie on. I think both of you were actually quite formative in helping direct some of her moral thinking on these issues. And now she's become completely unapologetic in her opposition to the same things that you're fighting. And so you've actually served the conservative movement in a very valuable way, Jennifer, in bringing a lot of that moral clarity to these issues that for some reason seem to even confuse the pro-life Christians, don't they? You would think they would be on our side on a lot of these things. But before I get carried away, Jennifer, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, why did you pick this battle? This can't be fun. Are you just like a sucker for punishment? Tell us how God brought you to where you're at and what you're doing.
Well, as you mentioned, I did work in pediatric clinical care nursing for a long, long time. I worked at UC San Francisco, UCLA, Children's Hospital Oakland. So, I was always on the front seat of the future, the next new technology, the next new whatever. And I just became more and more concerned with, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later, the collapse of medicine, the collapse of do no harm medicine. So I went back to graduate school and I got my master's in bioethics. And when I was in graduate school, I had this harebrained idea to found the Center for Bioethics and Culture that I now run. Because I wanted everybody to know what I had learned. I thought everybody would want to know and be as alarmed. So I entered this new space of nonprofit educational work at the height of Dolly the sheep had just been cloned. George Bush was, fighting the human embryonic stem cell, human cloning debates. And I was one of the few people that was saying, well, how do we come to have 500,000 frozen embryos in the United States that are now part of this debate about developing cures to treat Michael J. Fox and Christopher Reeve? And
Wow.
where are all these eggs going to come from to make all these embryos so that we can develop all these stem cell lines to make all these cures for all the woes? And, I live in California. We passed a huge bond initiative, to fund stem cell cloning research in California.
That's
And
right.
it was sold as cures for California. And, Seth, we burned through all that money and nobody's been cured.
That's right. Yep.
So that's kind of and so in that space of human cloning and embryo research and frozen surplus human embryos, I decided to take a deep dive into assisted reproductive technologies, because at the root of all this was the ability to make these embryos in the lab, to help people have babies, to cure people. So, and here I am, 10 movies later.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
still chugging along.
Many of our listeners may have caught what you said earlier, because we have done some extensive research and episodes, Jennifer, on UCSF. So it was fascinating to me, because I must have missed that in your bio, that you had worked at places like that, because of course UCSF is the late term abortion training capital of North America. And some people believe maybe the world. You have Dr. Daniel Grossman there, which, I mean, sometimes Providence has a sense of humor. His last name's literally Grossman. Grossman, and he's an abortionist and an abortion trainer with Bixby Center for Reproductive Health, hosted out of UCSF. Some of the most breaking edge, Darwinistic, humanistic, Nazi-esque kind of things happen at UCSF. So I just think it's fascinating and maybe providential that you came from almost the maw of the lion to where you are now.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him or his work. I apologize, but I left the UCSF many, many years ago. But when I was there, we were still doing what I would call good, proper medicine in the space of pediatric and critical care. We opened the first pediatric bone marrow clinic, bone marrow stem cell transplant, in our ICU. I worked with a surgeon who did the first surgery at UCSF that took the little baby out of the mother's womb and did the surgery and corrected the defect, and then put the baby back in the womb. So when the baby was born healthy and well. So, there was a lot of good and exciting things that were being done there. But I still was becoming, because, you always, especially in children, you can really push those limits. You get premature babies. Well, how premature is premature? And, all those complex questions around, parental consent and new technology and a lot of, new stuff, which is clinical trial stuff. And, children can't consent to be part of these projects. It's parents that have to consent. So, but anyway.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm here.
Well, consent, I mean, we'll get into that later, Jennifer. Consent, that really is the sacred cow, isn't it, of liberalism and squishy fake conservatives or libertarians. I mean, as if mere consent removes all moral considerations. But UCSF is particularly on the breaking edges of the culture of death. You could have a hospital staff working heroically to save a 24-week-old delivered premature baby in one wing at UCSF, Jennifer. And in the other wing of the same hospital, you could have an abortionist actively working to induce cardiac arrest with digoxin or potassium chloride inserted through the mother's abdomen, punctured through the amniotic sac, and a needle inserted into the baby's heart or skull to then deliver that child dead. Or not use digoxin because it might spoil the tissue, but try to do a labor induction abortion so that you can get the tissue and organs intact so that you can sell them to ABR, Advanced Bioscience Resource Lab in Northern California, which was part of the whole undercover journalistic expose of David DeLayden and Sandra Merritt in the Center for Medical Progress. So these are all such interconnected culture of death issues that fascinating, Jennifer, have all of the same people behind all of it. If they're not leading all of them, then they're either sitting on each other's boards, they're all talking, they're donating to one of another, they're inviting one another to each other's seminars and conferences. It's something I would like you to talk about too, is that we talk about a lot of issues, but we have to understand it's actually the same team. It's almost as if they're different captains or colonels on different battlefronts, but they're all reporting to the same general. And all these people share very similar philosophical assumptions, let's call it, or religious presuppositions in how they view the person. And you talk a lot about that on sort of the bioethics side. But what was your first focus with the Center for Bioethics and Culture? What did your organization begin doing against a lot of these things?
Yeah, well, our first film came out of those early George Bush debates, and that was a film you mentioned, Exploitation, because we knew that young women were going to be required on a mass scale to sell their eggs. And so, we were the first ones that were raising the alarms that this is dangerous to women. It's dangerous to their health. It's dangerous to their future fertility. And then connecting the dots that their eggs would go on and make children that maybe one day want to grow up and know who their biological mother was. Right. So, and I think what most people didn't realize is that egg donation, one, it's not really been adequately studied. So what we know about the risks are smaller than what we don't know about the risks. And when we were just writing and speaking and raising the concerns about all these healthy young women, that's how these women started reaching out and telling me their stories. Hey, I sold my eggs. Hey, I was in college and I saw an ad in the school newspaper. My daughters went to UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley had ads in the school newspaper offering $100,000 to sell your eggs. And one of the young women in the film was a PhD student at the University of Kansas, and I went with her to Kansas to testify in the state Senate against a bill that would not allow women to be paid to do this. We lost, in a conservative red state like Kansas, because if we don't let women sell their eggs, then we can't help people have babies. It's just that kind of crazy thinking. So that sort of, was our first, dip of our toe in the water, if you will, in uncovering big fertility.
Wow.
Exposing.
How big of an industry is big fertility?
Well, it's huge. It's multi-billion, and it's global. So it's not just, isolated to the United States. I mean, because when you look at the legal framework, what's illegal in one state or one country is legal in another, and eggs and sperm and embryos are really tiny and can easily be freezed and shipped all around. So, but it's a multi-billion dollar a year industry, and it's trending up. It's not like our efforts are putting the kibosh. Right. As much as I'd like to say we've killed big fertility, it's growing.
Yeah. It's fascinating how all this is connected, Jennifer. Every time I have these conversations with someone like you or Katie, you just start seeing all the interconnectedness. How could we ignore the fact that the widespread popularization, funding, and exercising of quote unquote abortion rights has harmed many women's fertility. So then they have to turn to in vitro fertilization or surrogacy or various ways to obtain a child. How many of those women are doing that because their prior abortion harmed some of their fertility potential? How much of it has to do with the VAX word you're never supposed to say? How much of it has to do with birth control and doctors telling young teenage girls that they ought to get on birth control to help with an irregular cycle, and then they're on it for 15 years, and then they decide they want to have babies? There's so much interesting sort of interconnectedness on so many of these issues. But one thing that Katie Faust and I have talked a lot about, and she puts it very well, Jennifer, and I'm sure you'll agree, that we put the desires and rights, we put the desires of adults before the rights of children on both sides of the same coin. So I think Katie says that third-party reproductive technologies is the opposite side of the same child commodifying coin. So with abortion, we say you're unwanted child, so I can take your right to life. And then on the other side of that child commodification coin, Jennifer, we say, I really want this child, so I can take away their right not to life, but their right to be raised by the two individuals responsible for their existence, their right to a mother and a father. But you just said, Jennifer, something about the dangers for the women in the exploitation industry. Could you speak to that more? Could you unpack that more? Because a lot of people aren't aware, yes, the rights of the child, that's primary, right? But how willing are these people to sacrifice the health care of the very women that they say they're there to serve?
Yeah. Well, and my work at the Center for Bioethics and Culture has never focused on the abortion debate, and that has always been an intentional decision, because we are more focused in novel new biotechnologies. So what people don't realize is that egg donors, well, let me just say a few things about fertility. There's many things that affect our fertility, and negatively affect our fertility. And for men and women. I mean, there's environmental things. Do I smoke? Do I drink too much alcohol? Am I too fat? Am I too thin? Those kind of things. The biological clock is real. Did I just wait too long? And I think people don't realize that our fertility is very fragile. The fact that human beings can make a new life, it's pretty miraculous, because things have to just work just perfectly to make that happen. It's not like we're rabbits and we just can spit out babies all the time. So bracket that. So, but when you look at the young woman who's being paid, we talk about donation, but it's not a donation. 99.9% is there's money changing hands. And the big fertility will say, oh, we're not buying eggs. We're just paying her for her time. No, her time. You're paying her for the eggs. If she doesn't produce eggs, she doesn't get a paycheck. So she's put on very, very high dose, powerful fertility drugs in order to produce lots of eggs. Because if you're paying a woman $5, $6, $7, $8, $10,000, whatever, you don't want one egg. So you want a lot of eggs. And so you're going to put her on very powerful high dose hormones to make her ovaries go into hyperdrive and produce lots of eggs. And then she has to undergo a surgical procedure with anesthesia and all the risks that we know of that, to have the eggs extracted. So there's all these short-term things that can go wrong. And the biggest one is called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. I'm sorry to be so technical, but that's when the ovaries just get so huge because they're producing all these eggs, 20, 40, 50, 60 eggs, that there's all this risk of stroke, kidney failure, just damage to your organs, because, water in your body has to go somewhere. And we're not meant to have all this water just out there in our bodies, which is why 2 of the women in exploitation had strokes. Wow. So the short-term risks are pretty well known. It's the longer-term risks we don't know. How many of these women go on and have problems with their own fertility because their own fertility was damaged by this procedure? How many women go on and have reproductive cancers? One of the women in the film, the young woman who was a PhD student at Kansas, went on and developed breast cancer as a very young woman. And for anybody to be selected to be an egg donor, you have to check a pretty exhaustive medical history. And you won't be picked if you check yes, I have a medical history, a family history of breast cancer. Nobody's going to want your eggs. They're not going to pay you for your eggs. So these are women that already been screened out for not being at risk or having a history of diseases. So, my colleagues and I got published in the medical literature, a case report of 5 women, otherwise healthy, no history of breast cancer, who as very young women got breast cancer and were egg donors, egg sellers, just trying to raise the temperature. But of course, big fertility won't study it. So we have when you sell your eggs, you're not in a database. If you donate your kidney, if I give you a kidney, I'm in a database that tracks organ donors. You're in a database because you received an organ. Egg donors, there's no registry. It's not on the birth certificate. The baby doesn't have, oh, here's your biological mother, egg donor, nice little Susie at University of Kansas. So there's just and then as a nurse, what really gets in my gets on my nerves is the fact that these women are paid. Where are you paid in the informed consent process? When your doctor is informing you, you need to do this, you need to take these medications, you need to have this surgery, you need to do these procedures. Oh, by the way, here's your $20,000. Informed consent has nothing to do with money. It's transactional. It's yes, I need the money. Sure, whatever the risks are, doctor, I'll take them. I need the money. I mean, informed consent is very powerful and coercive when people need money, and they're offered money. So there's this everything. There's so much rotten eggs stuff.
And Jennifer, how many women who are wanting to sell their eggs because they just need to make money or for whatever reason, how many of them are truly informed by the medical infrastructure and powers that be about some of the risks that you just detailed?
Well, they're not informed. They don't have to be informed. And that's the dirty little secret. Since we haven't done any long-term, big, serious studies on women who sell their eggs, how can you inform people? We just say, oh, there's no known risk, instead of there's no risk we know of because we've never studied it, which is a way different, way of presenting it. But even still, if you tell young women, we've never studied it, we don't know what the risks are, we think you'll be fine, here's $30,000. I mean, you got to take that money out of it.
Yep.
That was the bill in Kansas that we were trying to pass, was just like an organ donor, you cannot be paid to sell your organ. It's truly a donation. Just trying to get the legislators to take the money out of it. No dice. No, if women don't get paid, they won't do it.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. There's so much there, Jennifer. It's identical to how the abortion industry operates, by the way. The abortion industry has denied for years, decades actually, that abortion has any linkage to breast cancer, preterm labor in subsequent pregnancies, and mental health. And there's one book they point to, and the book looks at like 3 to 4 studies that claim to not have found a connection between those things compared to the 70 others that found a positive connection. I mean, it's just statistical malfeasance, but it's the same thing, right? Women are not informed when they go in for an abortion of these risks and correlations to some of these negative health outcomes later, because of course, if they were, most women would reject it, right? Do you remember the raging debate, Jennifer, over post-menopausal hormone replacement? Back in what was it, like 2000 or something? Nationwide frenzy because of a report that came out, a Women's Health Initiative or something like this, that showed a small increase in your chance of breast cancer if you use postmenopausal hormone replacement. And it was like national frenzies. I know OBs who were getting calls off the hook from women pissed off that they weren't told this. And yet the chance of breast cancer following an abortion is way higher, and yet women are never told that. Women are not told any of the risks that you just went through either. So we should discuss these institutions and movements as purely exploitative. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it gets me back to what's the role of medicine? The egg donor isn't a patient. She's not sick. She doesn't need these medications. She doesn't need to be doing this, very dangerous, harmful thing to her body. And I think, well, and we can talk about that in the transgender. There's nothing wrong with these children. Maybe they're confused, they have gender dysphoria or whatever, but they don't need to be medicalized. They need to be sorted out. The young college girl doesn't need to sell her eggs to pay her bills. We need to we need to work on lowering college tuition and get rid of, when I look at the administrative layer in the University of California educational system, get rid of a whole layer of administrators. And so we can drop tuition for students so they don't have to sell parts of their body to.
No, Jennifer, that's too simple.
That's not my area of expertise, but it's just, what is the role of medicine? And the egg donor is not a patient. She's not sick. She has no medical benefit from doing this to her body. The benefit to her is financial.
Yep. Well, good obstetrics and good medicine, Jennifer, used to function off of a Judeo-Christian worldview. That's where good medicine came from historically. It was Christians opening the hospitals. It was Christians going into medicine and becoming doctors. And so you had philosophical and religious presuppositions that had already dealt with and answered questions like, what is the body for, right? What does it mean to be human? Where do human rights come from? But now you and I know, Jennifer, most of the medical infrastructure today is operating off of a different religion, the religion of humanism. Can you talk about that and some of like how has the ethics shifted how we view the biology?
Yeah. Well, let me just say the Hippocratic Oath is a pagan document. The opening of the oath starts by him swearing to the gods of Hygeia, and there's a whole list of gods that he is swearing his allegiance to as he's writing the Hippocratic Oath. So I'm not sure that I can agree that medicine started as a Judeo-Christian enterprise when you look at the actual original oath. Now, of course, medical schools have altered and amended the oath and obliterated and gutted it to the point where it's not even recognizable as any kind of oath.
Right.
But I guess for me, as somebody who worked in clinical nursing for 2 decades, what I saw shift was that we now see medicine as its service providers. When I was a young nurse or in nursing school in Southern California, we had patients, we had doctors, we had nurses, we had respiratory therapists. When I left nursing, I was told I had clients and customers. You have a healthcare provider. I'm just providing healthcare. You show up to the doctor's office. You've done your Google research. You say, doctor, my little boy thinks he's a girl. I want you to block his puberty. I want you to put him on cross-sex hormones. We have become consumers of medicine. We don't recognize, and some of that's because medicine succeeded and gave away some of their professional authority. The pendulum kind of spoke. It used to be doctors knows best, and you didn't question your doctor ever, which I don't think is good either. We ought to be able to go to our doctor and say, doctor, I think I'd rather wait a couple more weeks before I try that or something. Now the doctor doesn't know anything. He's just there to provide whatever we want him to provide for us. Wow. So those are the shifts that I saw. And whether you want to talk about religious communities, churches, whatever, we bought into that. Yeah. I meet when I speak to religious audiences, it's almost overwhelmingly Catholic audiences, and I'm not Catholic. I love my Catholic friends, but I'm not Catholic. But the Catholic Church is much more open to my work because they have official church teaching. Thou shalt not, do IVF. Thou shalt not freeze embryos. Thou shalt not, all that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm in a safe ground when I'm in a Catholic audience, because even if there's people in the church that say, well, I don't agree with that, I can say, well, okay, that's fine. Bring it up with the Pope. Yeah. But when I'm in non-denominational mainline Protestant churches, I've debated Jewish rabbis before. It's like herding cats.
Wow.
Because there's no official, no official top down, all the Jews believe this and all the Protestants, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, Southern Baptist General. I can't even keep track of how many Baptist churches are. Yeah. So to me, the shifts have been in how we view and perceive medicine. And who is medicine in service to? Medicine is now in service to my wants, my desires, and what my wallet, my checkbook can afford.
Wow. Wow. Um, well, Katie Faust put it well once, Jennifer, that, with adoption, you have to have background checks to ensure that you're qualified to be an adoptive parent. But with surrogacy, the only check that has to clear is the check at the bank.
Yeah.
So speaking to your point, right, about what I want, what I need, what I'm going to pursue, and how I'm going to wield my wallet to get what I want and fulfill my desires, even if it compromises the rights of other people. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I've been frankly shocked in the last year and a half of the pushback I've gotten from pro-life Christians, Jennifer, some of them donors, or were, to my ministry, when I made a moral, philosophical, and biblical religious argument against surrogacy and against IVF. Can you kind of start from the bottom? How do these practices operate in the real world? And then secondly, why do you think it's so hard for so many Christians to see why this is wrong? But start from the basics. What are we talking about? Exactly how does IVF happen? And of course surrogacy almost always assumes IVF as well. But go ahead.
Well, there's two ways it happens. I think, we'll bracket it out. There's the husband and wife or the heterosexual couple that's doing IVF using their own egg and sperm, right? So the eggs have to come out of the woman's body, the sperm has to come out of the man's body, the embryos are made in the lab, and we decide how much layer of testing. Do we want boy embryos? Do we want girls? Do we want ones that have no Down syndrome, whatever? How many are we going to make? Are we going to freeze them? How many are we going to implant? Do we want twins? Do we want triplets? That's the husband and wife combination. All of that is very, very expensive. All of that has very high failure rate, and all of that has medical short and long-term complications. And most of the time it fails. So, which is why, it gets back to why do we have now over 1 million frozen embryos in the United States? We make a lot because we know how many of them along the way are not going to end up in a live birth.
Won't make
now,
it. Yep.
Then the other area where I spend 99% of my time, and that's in the area of what we call third-party conception. So it could be a husband and wife, and she's got bum eggs or he's got bum sperm, so you're using a sperm donor or an egg donor. It could be a single person who just says, I don't have all the bits and pieces, but I want a child, so I'm going to buy eggs, rent a womb, or I'm a woman, I'm just going to get sperm from the sperm bank and be a single mother by choice. Or it can be a gay couple. So any of those kind of combinations requires a third party, to fill in the deficit that the people don't have. And so then you're punting all those risks of health and danger from the mother and the baby to an egg donor, to a surrogate mother. And of course, these risks are also to the children. We know I know in our own research and all the other research people have done that surrogate pregnancies are very high risk. A surrogate pregnancy is a much higher risk for the woman and the child than when a woman is pregnant with her own child. And if you think about organ donation, this woman's body is pregnant with somebody else's baby. Her body is recognizing it as a foreign object. And so we know that causes complications to the pregnancy: preeclampsia, maternal gestational diabetes, hypertension, C-section. Because of the high failure rate, surrogates often are asked, will you carry twins or triplets? Because if we put more in, we have more of a shot at getting a baby or a couple of babies, and that presents all kinds of health complications and ethical problems. So, and all of this is very, very expensive. Your basic run-of-the-mill, nilly-vanilly take-home IVF baby is a 6-figure baby. So then you have the whole issues of this class. I mean, who's buying and who's selling? You see Kim Kardashian on the cover with her surrogate baby, but Kim Kardashian is never offering to be the surrogate because she has money to buy. And who's paying? Military wives in the United States are, the bulk of our surrogates in the US are military wives. Wow. They're low income women. They're partnered with low educated men,
Interesting. Wow. That reminds me something, again, that Katie once said on the show, Jennifer. She said, when it comes to the best interest of the child, there's a big difference between seeking to mend parental loss and paying six figures to create it.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, Jennifer? Because you've done films on these kinds of things, okay? So most people, I'd say a lot of people haven't actually met or know that they've met the children who were the products of these experimental rearrangements of the family structure, to put it in one way. What's it like being on the other end? What do the now adults or older children of these creations say? I mean, like, what is it like to find out that all this money exchanged hands? Or what was that story out of California last year, Jennifer, with the gay couple suing? Was it the lab? For getting the gender wrong because they wanted a boy, dang it.
Yeah, that really gets to the commodification of
Yeah,
buying
talk about that.
buying and selling children. Yeah, it is. It's very, I mean, from beginning to end, it's eugenic. You're screening the egg donor because you want, smart, pretty, talented. You're screening the sperm donor. You want smart, pretty, talented, whatever. You're screening the embryos because you want, whatever you've conjured up in your mind, that you want. And so you're telling everybody, you're putting in your order. And then, we've seen this several times, not just at California, but I think that one particular couple was just so offensive in their blatant entitlement of we ordered this and we got that. We had one of the women in our film Big Fertility. She was pregnant carrying twins for a couple in Spain. In Spain, all surrogacy is illegal, so the Spanish come to America. Open season on women here. And the couple in Spain had requested a boy and a girl. And the surrogate did not know that. And when the surrogate was going for one of her regular generic ultrasounds, they discovered she was pregnant with two boys. And she called the people in Spain to say, congratulations, you're having two boys. And they immediately were like mad because they had bought, paid for, ordered a boy and a girl. And they wanted to know who messed up, who was to blame for this error. And it's, when you see your physicians as a service provider and you've paid them to provide a service and then you don't get what you ordered, people feel entitled. And, we see it happen with time and again. And when we did the film Anonymous Father's Day, because that is looking at, the end product, the children, in Anonymous Father's Day, these are now adults that we interviewed. We asked them about how they found out, how old were they when they found out, and what all that meant to them. And it's really interesting because depending on how you find out and when you find out can be really crucial to your own development.
Oh my gosh.
And
yeah.
I would say overwhelmingly of all the donor conceived people, isn't it weird we have a new category of people, donor conceived people? All the donor conceived people, I think overwhelmingly would like to see this industry just shut down. They don't think it's going to happen.
Wow.
However, they're happy to be alive. I mean, they're absolutely happy to be alive. They're grateful, and they might have been raised in a really good, wonderful home with good, loving parents.
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, they're just not. It's just nasty
Wow.
to think about that.
Doesn't that go back to, Jennifer, to the whole like believe all victims, like just the total crap narrative that always was? Believe all victims, but not the victims of the religion of secular humanism. Only the victims of people who call themselves Republicans so we can smear the conservative movement as women-hating bigots. But if it's the victims of the ideologies of leftism, oh no, they have to be silenced. Those people need to shut up. And whether that's abortion survivors, Jennifer, that I have on my show, I'm a board member for the Abortion Survivors Network. I mean, these are children who survived failed abortion attempts. They were born alive, Jennifer, in the process of the abortion attempt on their own life. The left doesn't want to hear their victim stories, just like they don't want to hear the victim stories of the people whose stories you told in your anonymous. What was say the name of the film again? Anonymous Fathers.
Anonymous Father's Day.
Of Anonymous Father's Day, yeah. I mean, those are people saying, "Well, I'm the result of these experimental, you know, things, and I don't want this to happen. I'm harmed because of this." But
Yeah.
once again, our culture is obsessed with placing the desires and self-realization of the individual above the rights and interests of children and of family members.
And when I testify at hearings, I often say, okay, we're going to have another story war, right? Because I'll show up, I'll be testifying against surrogacy. I'll have surrogate mothers who had bad experiences. I'll have children born of surrogacy that, question and object to the method of their conception. And of course, the other side has the happy surrogates, and the children born of surrogacy who say, my mom and dad are great, and our surrogate is wonderful, and she's part of our family. And so it just boils down to a story war versus us having some kind of foundational shared agreement about that thou shalt not buy and sell people.
Correct.
Thou shalt not exploit and risk the health of another person's body because you want something from that person's body and you've got money to pay.
Well said, Jennifer. Well said. Because that's the result of modernity and our relativistic, subjectively obsessed culture. And you saw this shift with the advent of television, right, and media. We moved away from being a word-based culture, right, with an emphasis on linear, rational thought and argumentation, to an image-based culture with the shortest attention span that demands to be entertained. And so, we went from the macro narrative to the micro narrative, right, to the meta narrative, and everything is about my story and my feelings and my truth. And this happened. This was very popular in the abortion wars early on. Same thing. You'd have a pro-lifer tell her story where she had an abortion and it harmed her and she regrets killing her baby, and then the pro-aborts come out and say, "No, I felt empowered." It's like, well, okay, we need to rise above simply what I thought about this experience and actually have a larger conversation about morality and rights and our republic and our form of government. But the left's not interested in that conversation because they hate the founding and they hate the ideals that built this republic, because in large part it actually prevents them from their sort of totalitarian remaking man in his own image experiment. But I think we should use the words you're saying. I think that's valuable. I think it's important to say this is the buying and selling of human beings. Katie tells a story in her book, Them Before Us, Jennifer. The woman's name was Teresa Erickson, who was sentenced to prison for selling babies. But her crime was not selling babies to non-biologically related adults, which is a common occurrence for big fertility. Her crime was a crime of process. You see, it was Erickson's timing that caused her prison sentence. Her enterprise would have been entirely legal had the surrogacy contract been signed before conception. Right? Signing the contract after conception fell into the baby selling category. And so, as Katie puts it in her book, only a profit-blind industry could behave as if the timing of a contract would alleviate a child's genealogical bewilderment, feelings of commodification, and mother loss trauma. Can you talk about that more as when we're talking about the stories of the people, of the children?
I'm very familiar with Teresa Erickson. She practiced her, practiced her craft in California. I remember when Eggsploitation came out, this was before she got busted and went to jail. She had a podcast and she bashed my film Eggsploitation. Erickson was an egg donor herself. And then thought, oh, this is a great way I can now make money. I can just set up my own agency. She's a lawyer by trade, so she could draft all the contracts. She was a surrogate broker. So there was absolutely no love lost for me the day I woke up and opened my inbox and saw that Teresa had been busted by the FBI for her little baby trafficking ring. But yeah, it's sort of a little loophole in the law, I guess. Well, this is by sign, but no, this isn't. I spend way too much of my time reading surrogate contracts. And the whole entire contract is tied to money. And if the surrogate doesn't comply, doesn't obey, doesn't follow the contract, she's in breach of the contract. and therefore has to give all the money back. And the final payment of the contract is the handing over of a baby.
Yep.
And I don't understand how anybody could read a surrogate contract and look me in the eye with a straight face and say, oh no, this baby is not being bought and sold. This baby is being bought and sold. And this woman is enslaved contractually for 9 months. She's told if she can travel, how far she can travel, what she can eat, what she can't eat. I mean, one surrogate had to eat a vegan diet for the 9 months of her pregnancy because the people that had hired her and were paying her wanted to make sure that she had a vegan diet in her body for their product. They're told if and when they can have sexual intercourse with their partner. I mean, it's just everything that you can imagine.
These are in contracts.
These are the whims. Yeah. And there's people will say, is there a standard contract? No, because the contract depends on the whims and wishes of the purchasing parents. Wow. And what do they want? One couldn't wear perfume. It's most of them say you can't smoke. Okay, fine. No fast food. All right. But it's crazy. One surrogate in California, she waived her end of right decision making in her contract. So if she was on life support during the pregnancy, the intended parents who had paid her, who she never met, she had no relationship with these people, they had ultimate decision making on if and when life support would be removed.
Wow.
In a contract. And she agreed. She signed the contract because she needed the money. And who thinks they're going to have to be on life support, right? You just think, okay, sure, whatever. It's not going to happen. Won't happen. Don't worry.
Wow. Well, and then in many of these contracts, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, the paying the paying intended parents who may or may not be biologically related, right? Who may or may not be biologically related to the child.
Right.
If there's something wrong with, quote unquote, that baby, they can require the birth mother, the woman gestating and growing the child, to abort the baby. Is that right?
Well, it's in the contract. They're called, they always have abortion clauses. They have selective reduction. We had 2 big cases in California where surrogates were pregnant with triplets, and the purchasing parents wanted them to selectively reduce the pregnancy down. We've never actually seen those contracts challenged. We've never started strapping women down against their will and force them to terminate and abort or reduce. But it is in the contract. And again, it gets back to these women sign these contracts. Right. They are agreeing to doing that. And what happened in these 2 particular cases was when forced with they had to do it, they couldn't.
Right. Wow. Yep. There's the sacred cow of consent again. Help bring some clarity, Jennifer, for Christians who are, I guess, laboring under this myth of consent as well. Because I've run into so many old friends on social media, who are just shocked that I would oppose things like surrogacy when everyone is agreeing to it. Can you elevate that conversation for people a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a few things. One is you have to remove money. You can't, again, have a serious discussion around the fact that women are overwhelmingly doing this because they have economic need. Right. So there's no free. When you look at informed consent, it's not freely given. Right. It's under duress. So you need to remove the money, and then we can talk about that. 2, medicine has no business having women consent to doing something that they don't need to do to their body that we know is harmful and dangerous. It gets back to the fact that a surrogate mother and an egg donor, they're not patients. It's not a woman who's on her own becoming pregnant with her own child because she wants to be a mother. These are women that are doing something medically. They can't get pregnant without a medical doctor, that is creating the embryos in the lab and transferring and taking the eggs out of their body. Right. Medicine has no business having women do things to their bodies that they have no medical need to do. And we know that egg donors and surrogate mothers have died. They've died in the United States. They've died in third world countries. We've had 2 surrogate mothers in California die. Uh,
Wow.
yeah. We've had a surrogate mother in Boise, Idaho die. She was carrying twins for a couple in Spain. The twins died. We had a Jane Doe surrogate die. You know, we find the surrogate deaths because there's usually a GoFundMe set up.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
this woman has died, and she's, I've talked to husbands. I've interviewed and spoken to husbands who wives were surrogates who have died. We had on our podcast a young woman who, when she was a little girl, her mother was a surrogate, and her mother died of complications of the surrogate pregnancy. So it affects, it has all these. So when I think about, God-fearing, church-going, pro-life, that kind of traditional family value crowd, I don't understand how they can reconcile that this is okay with those other values that they think are important and they hold dear to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that keeps occurring to me, Jennifer, is again our view of what the body is for, right? This idea of teleology or telos, and I think much of modernity, and I call it the secular moral revolution, if you will, at the end of the day, kind of comes down to a fundamental disagreement, right, or new view of what we're for, what our bodies are for, right? Apart from extreme medical intervention, like you just said, babies are only created through an act of sexual intercourse. And then that woman's body was created for that baby. The uterus is the only organ in a woman's body that's not there for her. It's there for another human being, but we have rearranged the whole family structure and how we create children and how we create families, right? I mean, like some of the organizations, right, Jennifer, that help like gay couples get babies or something are literally called like the modern family and all these things because they really are
Men
trying to
having babies.
yeah, men
It's
having babies, whatever, crazy names. It
like,
really
when,
is an
when has a man ever had a baby?
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, words carry worlds, don't they? And words assume ideas and premises that often the speaker is not aware that they're absorbing, but they're still operating off of that assumed worldview, right? This is why C.S. Lewis said, Jennifer, the most dangerous ideas in a society are not the ones being argued for; they're the ones being assumed. Because assumed ideas can be very, very dangerous. Because you're probably operating off of that worldview and ideas, but you're not aware that you've absorbed a certain worldview, a certain set of lenses that then has all sorts of other cultural and political and philosophical assumptions. Okay, so the common thread here is this new view of the body, and it's been called Gnosticism, body self dualism. It goes back centuries. The church labeled it a heresy centuries ago. The old Gnostics that said the body's bad and evil and naughty and disgusting. And so the real person, is our inner person. It's our consciousness. It's our thoughts, right? Our desires. And so we need to liberate the real person from the prison of biology. And boy, doesn't that describe IVF and surrogacy and, of course, the transgender alphabet mafia. So as we kind of wind down the show together today, Jennifer, can you talk about your new work on that third front of this war, the transgenderism front, its similarities, and some of the work you've been doing with your film?
Well, we were happily just doing our thing and we were watching the trans stuff over there, but we thought, well, that's really not our issue because we're focused on biotech, emerging new technologies, medical ethics kind of stuff. And lo and behold, we found out that before children are transitioned, and I don't believe you can transition a child to the opposite sex, but before they do that, they would offer them fertility preservation. And they would say, young boy, before you become a little girl, let's freeze and bank your sperm. Or same with little girl, before you become a little boy, let's freeze and bank your eggs, so that we can have those for you when you get older. And then when you want to have children, because all this transition surgery and medication is going to make you infertile, going to sterilize you. You won't lose your fertility. We have preserved your fertility in the freezer so that you can then interface the assisted reproductive technology world. And when we saw those collisions,
And they're doing this with
we
minors, right? With minors.
yes, yes. They're offered fertility preservation. Well, for one, I raised 4 children. I cannot imagine my 12-year-old son or my 9-year-old daughter being offered this, even thinking about having kids or wanting. I mean, kids,
Right.
they don't even know, they don't remember even to make their bed, but let alone make big decisions about freezing and banking their eggs or their sperm.
Yeah. Wow.
So we made transmission, what's the rush to reassign gender, which is a real deep dive with medical ethics and parents and, looking at that. And then our most recent film, The Detransition Diaries, focuses on the people who have regret, who thought that they could change their bodies and live as the opposite sex, only to find out that it didn't solve any of their problems. If in fact, it made more problems, made things even worse for them health-wise. So, but again, it's an improper use of medicine. There's nothing wrong with these little boys and girls physically, biologically. It's a lie that you can change your sex through medicine and science and technology and surgery. It's like you say, it's a cult. It's a radical agenda that's clutching at our children.
Yep.
So
That's
yeah,
fascinating what you said, Jennifer. That they will offer to minors extraction of their gametes to freeze for future use, which is that's fascinating because it's a tacit admission that you can't change sex and only male sperm can create a baby. So only males can provide what's needed, and only a woman can provide eggs. So only a woman can have a baby. It's like this tacit admission that transgenderism is false, while at the same time getting those gametes to satisfy that likely future infertile person's desire for children. I mean, what a fascinating admission.
And it accentuates your comments about the body. On one hand, the gender activists want to say there's nothing wrong with these children. They're just part of this spectrum. There's 47 genders. We just want them to be their authentic self. But then they also want to chop things off and put them on medication. So which is it? They're just fine? This is just their authentic self. Leave them be. They're just diverse.
Yeah,
or do they need medicine? Because to me, you need medicine and you need surgery because there's something wrong with you.
That's right. You touched on, Jennifer, what actually not very many conservatives do, and I wish they would. And I appreciate what you just said. For our listeners, if you miss what she just said, it's fascinating. Jennifer saying that if the body means nothing because the real person is intangible, right? And that's why you could be trapped in a male body, but really inwardly you're Sally. So I'm not Seth, I'm Sally because little Sally lives inside of me. So if that's true and gender's fluid and you can change it like you do your own clothes, then why do you have to resort to physical surgical removal to make that inward person feel like the opposite sex? If the inward person is not biological or physical, then just change it inwardly. Why do you have to chop up the outside? So even the actions they take are once again this sort of admission of what we all know to be true, which is that we are both body and soul. Both things matter. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate example of this. When he rises, he still has the holes in his hands. He doesn't rise as a spirit. Even in his resurrection, he is still body and soul. We're image bearers of that creator, so we're body and soul. And the Psalms talk a lot about this, how when I groaned inwardly, my bones ached. Like there's all these comparisons in scripture of how physical, metaphysical, emotional experiences affect my physical presence and experience. There's always this linking of the two. This is the historic Orthodox Judeo-Christian perspective on what it means to be a person. But whether it's IVF, third-party reproductive technology, surrogacy, or transgenderism, it's this rejection of the body and what it's for, and an attempt to liberate ourselves from that, almost to remake ourselves anew. Speaking of remaking ourselves anew, Jennifer, can you talk? We're almost done here. Can you talk a little bit about what is involved in remaking yourself anew, quote unquote, through these surgeries, through the drugs? Because I know we're talking about puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgical intervention. I think I got all of them there. But can you give specific language, medication names? Can you actually teach our listeners what is
Sure.
involved in this process? What are the risks, and what do people not aware of?
Well, if you're going to block puberty, that starts young, right? Because, and kids can start puberty, as early as 5 and 6 or 7 or 8. They're put on a drug called Lupron. Egg donors are put on Lupron. Surrogates are often put on Lupron. That's sort of a medical castration, a medical menopause. It just stops the gonads. So the testes are not going to mature. They're not going to produce sperm. The ovaries are not going to, mature and produce eggs. That's blocked. It's stopped. Then they're going to be put on the cross-sex hormones, right? Because we want the little boy to become softer, and we want the fat to redistribute. And the same with, little girls. We want her to get facial hair. We want her voice to drop. We want her body fat to, redistribute, and she kind of leans out. And then if, they say that, once you start that, most children will progress on to some kind of a surgical intervention. For girls, it's overwhelmingly the double mastectomy, right? A surgeon who's tasked with not doing any harm is surgically removing healthy breasts. The woman in Detransition Diaries ironically speaks about how her insurance paid for her double mastectomy, which she had no medical need of, but will not pay for reconstructive surgery. Women aren't signing up by, big numbers for the bottom surgery. I don't want to gross out your audience by talking about bottom surgeries, because there's so many complications. You're making your fat, whether it's a man getting a neo-vagina or if it's a woman getting the phalloplasty, you're doing pretty gory surgeries to fashion a penis on a woman and a vagina on a man. And overwhelmingly, they don't function properly. There's all kinds of complications. Oh, I know, shocker. I mean, I was listening to one person who had the neo-vagina, and basically this man was saying basically if he sneezed, it like wanted to fall out. It's like, anyway, this is not polite company. I'm sorry, Seth.
No, it's
But yeah,
I think it's actually necessary because the pulpits are quiet about this stuff, Jennifer. The Christian church is silent, and all of these evil industries largely operate without accountability. So it's actually really important to use specific language. So I appreciate it. Continue.
But I just, because we're coming to the end, I want to always leave on a happy note. Recently we've just seen what the South Dakota governor has signed into law, legislation that says we won't do this to children here. Utah's governor has signed this into law. Crazy states like California have become a sanctuary state so that trans identified children can flee, South Dakota or Utah to come to California. We had that great whistleblower who just came out last week from the transgender clinic at Washington University. Now the Attorney General of Missouri is called for an investigation. I've said from the very beginning, this will stop because of lawsuits and malpractice and the harm that's been done. So, there are a lot of people that are waking up. We have, again, we have a new day. We have National Detransition Awareness Day coming up in a few weeks, early in March, where parents are standing out in front of the American Academy of Pediatrics annual conference in Anaheim a few months ago. Do not block kids' puberty. Do not chop off healthy breasts. Do no harm. Do no harm. So parents are being agitated, and our lawmakers are waking up and doing the right thing. So I've said that this is a culture war that will be winnable in our lifetimes. We will see this culture war won. We might not see surrogacy stopped or the buying and selling of eggs, those kind of things that I care deeply about. But I do think we will see the transing of children come to an end. It can't come soon enough.
Yeah, if good people will act. Reagan once said, "Evil is powerless if the good are unafraid." And for so long, the good have been afraid, Jennifer, and they've been running and hiding like wounded dogs with their tail behind their legs and not wielding politics for good. while the other side so passionately wields it for evil. Let's just finish with this, Jennifer. I want to play this one short clip and ask you one final question. This is from the absolute egghead white lab coat humanistic kooks at Vanderbilt University, Jennifer, which, Matt Walsh and a lot of the conservative activists in Nashville worked very hard to fight against their transgender surgical mutilation clinic. But this is a very short clip. This is Dr. Shane Taylor. This went somewhat viral last year, but it bears repeating because everyone needs to share this. And she's literally talking about the big money maker that these top and bottom surgeries are. So I'll play this short clip.
And in the female to male bottom surgeries, these are huge money makers. Again, I think this has to be an underestimate. If they're quoting around $20,000 for a phalloplasty, there's been different things that I've read that said it could be up to $100,000. These surgeries are labor intensive. They require a lot of follow-ups. They require a lot of OR time, and they make money. They make money for the hospital.
So a lot of OR time, a lot of follow-up, a lot of money, she said. A lot of money for the hospital. They're big money makers, these top and bottom surgeries. And she says the numbers she's citing are probably underestimated. She said that's got to be underestimated. Some of them might be up to $100,000. This is amazing. So I wanted to finish with this question for you, Jennifer. What's the balance between the various motivators for transing the kids or transgenderism writ large? This is something I think about a lot. I think a lot of people are disturbed by this question. Is it financial? Because they're creating cash patients for life. All of the medication these people have to be on for life after chopping off their own genitalia and chemically castrating themselves. Is it purely financial? Is it political? Right? Because you can position yourself as the compassionate defender of marginalized communities. So you can accrue power, buy votes essentially, and then castigate your political opponents as bigots. This is what the left has been doing for decades, right, Jennifer? They position themselves as the compassionate defender of a marginalized community but their ideas and policies are actually harming the very community they claim to be an advocate of. But it lets them accrue power and label conservatives as bigots. So is it a political motivator, or is it ideological and religious, right? This just man's attempt to remake himself, because there's got to be a lot of godlike power, Jennifer, that comes with reshaping people in your image. I mean, these doctors in industries that are chopping up people and remaking them, yeah, I bet you feel really powerful. I bet that's almost like a sort of a weird, like godlike power. So from your perspective, when we talk about some of these issues, what do you think is the driving motivator? Because these people are mad. They're complete kooks. They've lost their freaking minds. So that leaves people like me, Jennifer, to say, where does this come from? Is it mainly financial? Is it mainly political? Or is it more pure ideology? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I don't necessarily have proof to back up my thoughts. This is just what my gut tells me. One, yes, money is a driver. It's lucrative. You hear the saying a lot. You make a patient for life, right? You have a patient for life because you never stop taking your cross-sex hormones. You never stop having to go in and have your bits and pieces fixed because they're falling apart and they're not functioning. I think it's heavily ideologically driven. I think that is a lot of it. It's part of it's just the whole, when you look at the Biden administration and the men running around in women face, I think a lot of it is this, it's perverted men who have fetishes, whether it be full-on autogynephilia, where they're sexually aroused by presenting and faking, and it's a power drive. Why do men want to be in women's prisons? Why do men want to be in women's shelters? Why do men want to compete against women in sports? That is all an ideological. It's a perversion, but and part of it, I think it's evil. It's truly evil, and for some reason, it's things like the American Endocrine Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics and all major corporations have been captured by this woke ideology of, if you're not going to be on this team, you will be penalized. You will be, a hater, a bigot. You will be targeted. We will pull our business. Just the whole, cancel culture, threatening, boycotting, making your life a living hell, which is just it's ideologically driven. We need to, as fast as we can, reclaim our schools so that children are just being taught to read and write and not drag queen story hour. I mean, that's perverse. Drag queen story hour. Who in their right mind thinks that that's okay?
That's right.
And that's good for children.
Yep. We need to fight back. That's right. I just had Kirk Cameron on the show, Jennifer, to talk about his national library reading tour, where he's just reading great books called How You Grow. And how you grow, and it's not even citing Bible verses, and the liberal establishment erupted. It was almost as if Legion was saying, "How dare you try to get in front of our children? They're our children." And it's like, you're totally right. Why do men who dress up in sexually titillating stripper dress, why do they want to read books to your children so badly? It is pure evil. It is the manifestation of evil. But as Kirk Cameron said on the show, we need to stop being the complainers of culture and start being the creators of culture.
Yeah, and that's what we do with our movies. We are our art culture makers through our creations through film.
So tell us, where can people access your films and also support the Center for Bioethics and Culture?
Yeah, our YouTube channel is where all of our films are parked. It's the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. If you just Google exploitation on YouTube and you'll come to our channel. The center for our website is cbc-network.org. I'm very active on Twitter at Jennifer Lahl. I'm very active on Instagram. You can kind of find us all around. A little bit on Facebook, but we're out there making our noise and making our case. So
wonderful. Well, guys, Jennifer's and her team's films are privately funded. They need your help. We need to expose the deeds of darkness. We need to tell the other side of the story. We need to tell the stories of victims that the left doesn't want to hear because it compromises their ideology, their institutions, and their political grab for power. So go support them. We'll put all the links to that in the show notes, Jennifer. But thank you for your time. Stand fast, sister. Keep fighting the good fight. We're fully behind you.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you.
Yep. Well, thank you guys for tuning into the show today. Head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Give the show a rating and review. Let us know what you think. Give us 5 stars. It helps drive up the show. We really appreciate that. Go support Jennifer Lahl and the Center for Bioethics and Culture. Watch some of these films. I'm telling you, they're incredible. The Detransition Diary, Saving Our Sisters, released last fall. Exploitation, back from 2013. All really powerful films. Learning the exploitative nature of so much of the humanistic projects and obsessions of the last couple decades. Really important for you to be informed on this and to share it with others who are the target of so many of these ideas and industries. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/unaborted. And if you want to become a member, an ally of the White Rose Resistance to help us rebuild Christian resistance in America against our silent but far more deadly Holocaust of abortion, go to thewhiterose.life, thewhiterose.life. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted.